Hi, I'm Courtney Webster, and this is Your Recovered Life. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend, Tonya Meeks. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Tonya Meeks is an LMFT with a private practice in Beverly Hills and Newport Beach, with an emphasis in addiction and creativity. Tonya possesses immense passion for performance and has written and performed 2 critically acclaimed one-woman shows. Combining her clinical training and background in performance, she has created workshops and retreats called Telling the Truth on Stage, Healing Trauma and Addiction Through Performance. She designed these to assist others in assessing their creativity. Her production company, Exposure, supports others in developing solo work and performance material that speaks directly from the heart, exposing the truth of their lives on stage. Which is very amazing bio to read, but I also want to tell you, Tonya is amazing. And she's going to tell you her story, but I just want to tell you, I have seen her shows and they've taken my breath away. Tonya, I guess I can talk to you now. I'm like talking to Kim. Right. Go, there you are. Hi.
Hi.
So, I met you through, professional networking, like we saw each other at events. You're a therapist, I'm a coach, and we would see each other and we got friendly. And then I saw you were doing this show and I was like, yeah, I'd love to come see it. And I remember sitting there and seeing a lot of people, colleagues, right? Professionals that you work with coming in the audience, and I was just like, wow, this is really cool. I just was struck by your fearlessness. And then I didn't really know. I mean, I knew what the show was about, your relationship with your mom and you, and I didn't really know what to expect for sure. But then I saw it, and I saw just you telling the truth, like as your bio says, like you telling your truth in such a profound way. I mean, I was not alone in the audience when I was like because it touched my truth. It was like it was so. It was so inspiring to see somebody just like sharing. I think that's what really touches us is that connection is seeing somebody sharing and then being able to connect with them. And there's a bravery and a generosity in what you do. And I know you're an incredible therapist too. And I'm just so excited to hear how you kind of wove it together. So thank you for agreeing to share your story.
Oh, thank you.
So the first question I like to ask, and I kind of know the answer, is, have you found your calling and what is it?
I have found my calling. It's performance, basically. I got sober in a performance program in San Francisco, and through that process, like I've developed this one-woman show and a production company, and it was like I kind of battled that whole thing. The bobblehead is great for the video.
It's good. It's good.
But
I nod. You can bobble.
yeah, I can bobble. So it's just that, it was like the two worlds integrated. It was like my clinical work and the ability to create a performance about my life and have that impact people in such a deep way was really like, oh, I found a place to land on stage.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
It's a pretty singular story. I mean, I haven't heard anybody else. There's people who like get sober and become doctors or actors, right? Or singers, or there's all these amazing things people unleash and find in their passion. But the way you've been able to weave it together. So can you kind of tell us the story of what happened? We got sober, and then kind of how did it work?
Yeah, I was in a performance program in San Francisco, and in that program there was the voice teacher was, I don't know why I'm like, the video's flipping me out.
Okay.
It's okay. So the voice teacher was sober, and then there was another gal in the program that was also sober, and she, I tracked her. I grew up with alcoholism. I understood alcoholism and addiction, and I hadn't really seen anybody live a sober life, and we were all performing our life stories. So I watched her, and I was struggling with managing my addiction, and I had a lot of knowledge about that. And I ended up, not being able to manage it, ironically, who knew? And I, went to my first meeting with her, and I ended up staying sober, but through staying in that program and creating the show and having this intense outlet for myself, I was able to like stay sober, and my friend Dwayne, who ran the voice component of that program, was like, do your art and you'll stay sober. And it was like, I, did the show called Open Eyes. I started leading Artist Way and authentic movement groups, and just loved it. It was like I finally found a place where I could really land and be really big and intense. and open my heart up in that way and really impact people.
Cool. Well, but then there's also,
And then what happened with the therapy
well,
piece?
yeah, like, well, wait,
Yeah,
and you're a therapist. So how did,
yeah. So kind of what happened was I was leading groups and I was still doing therapy. I was doing weekly coaching with people and that piece still was continuing to come up. And I felt like, I really wanted to have a license because of the things that I was dealing with people. So I ended up going to graduate school at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara because they had a very experiential component. And the whole thing with them is their concept is that we're all wounded healers. And the fact if you do your own work, then you can facilitate other people in that process. But you have to kind of heal your own wounding prior to just launching in. So I did that. I was still working on another show, which is the show that I have now, Flying Standby. And I kind of kept the world separate for a long time. I had the show and I had my private practice and I was working in treatment centers and I was doing experiential work with people, but I really wasn't like launching the two together. And 3 years ago, I decided to put the show in the Hollywood Fringe Festival. And once I did that, and then I started kind of letting the colleagues from the addiction treatment world filter in. And at first I was like, I don't know if I should let these worlds collide. And then I decided to produce it myself and start the production company. And I solely market it to this industry, to clients in treatment, people in recovery, and people that work kind of in the treatment industry. And I thought, God, am I making the biggest mistake of my life, or is this the best thing I ever did? Because it was like, it's scary because like if I'm a clinician and then now I'm exposing all of my own stuff that's resolved, I'm still exposing my stuff basically, and that process, it finally hit me that when I looked up, I was like, oh, this is the way that I can still impact people. And because the story has resolution, I think of it as like redemptive storytelling. There's such a powerful process that can happen for people. So I've committed to, combining the two and really launching that as a full-time thing.
it's brilliant. And it's working.
And it's working.
And it's working.
It's really working.
So here's the part where someone watching who's like, well, I kind of like this or I kind of like that, or it looks like when you land where you are, you're like, oh, well, that was easy, but how'd that happen? So can you talk about what it was like to like, what made you decide? So you get sober and you're performing, but then you're like, okay, I heard you want to start working therapeutically, so I need to get some training. But did you have voices? Was there like, what was the process of like getting your training and getting your licensure and doing everything you need to do to be a therapist? And then was there a point where it kind of sounds like where you were like, something's missing and you wanted to bring that in?
I think what happened was, when I was in graduate school, I was still performing. And then the more I got involved in working in the treatment industry, I was kind of losing sight of my own creativity. And so I really missed that piece because I really believe that's like my authentic, true passion, what I'm supposed to be doing. And the clinical piece, because I'm good at that, I was like, well, I don't want to let that go. So there was this real battle of like how to integrate those two. And so when I made a commitment to launch the show and start the production company, it was like, as scary as it made sense where all those pieces integrated finally. That they didn't have to be separate worlds. I didn't have to keep the therapy over here and the show over here and kind of intermingle them, but not launch them together. Because it really does combine both pieces. The show lets me have my creative outlet, is also healing to other people. And then the retreats and the workshops I do called Telling the Truth on Stage, I'm really able to integrate like my clinical work with the creativity and be on my feet with people and have them embody the people that they're, embody their mother, embody their father, and actually get on their feet and get it out of their body. Because there's something different that happened for me when I actually played my mother versus, I believe in therapy, obviously, but there was something different in creating a story where I actually stood in her shoes. Like I grew to understand her in such a different way versus talking about, like I could say she's an alcoholic and she had love and gambling and food addiction and she was narcissistic and blah, blah, blah. And yet that didn't integrate the material for me because I still really loved this woman. And so through that storytelling, there's a place where I really was able to connect and heal that relationship with her.
Yeah, that's interesting because there is trauma in your story and you tell it. I think one of the things that's so, and I hadn't really thought of it until you've just described it, is that there's such a kindness in the way that you portray your mom, like,
Yeah.
kindness isn't even the right word. There's just
Yeah.
love, the compassion, like it comes through, and it's just, that's really an interesting to hear how that got influenced that way. That's very
Yeah,
cool.
because when I was in the performance program and I created the other show, Open Eyes, I was so afraid of creating a story about my mom. I didn't want to not tell the truth, and I also didn't want to make her look bad. Do you know what I mean? Because I didn't view it as a negative thing. Like, other people are like, "Oh, that's neglect," or leaving you home as a child is neglect, and I got that intellectually, but at the same time, I have deep love and compassion for her, and I think she spent a lifetime of sharing her story with me and wasn't able to tell that story herself because of her own trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So she went around trying to tell the story to people who weren't able to hear it, or she wasn't able to, she was so reactive in her way that she shared it, she seemed crazy. So then no one believed her when she did share the truth. So the desire was to be able to tell her story and integrate my story in that too, and to have that be seen and heard,
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautifully done. It's beautifully done. So how is it? You said they were kind of separate for a little while. Did you? Because I think that there's some people who do have like a passion for this and kind of their job, or this, or two passions. It's not like they're job. It's they're like passionate about this and passionate about this, and never the tween shall meet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, and you said it was kind of scary, but what would you say to somebody who had two really seemingly disparate passions, or I don't know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you really truly commit to both things, there's a way, say you have two separate things that you love, or you have one thing that you keep on the side that you love, that's your secret baby that you really want to launch, but you have the safety of what other thing you're doing over here. I think if you fully commit 1,000% to the thing you love, you can make money and make that your career. Like, they can truly integrate. And I think people think that the thing they love sometimes, especially if it's art or creativity, that it has to be a sidekick project, that you couldn't possibly take that on as a full-time gig because, people have a storyline, artists don't make money, and da-da-da-da. And I think that that's just not true. Like, I think that there's such a fear and self-sabotage in that. I mean, I had a lot of stuff around that. I mean, being a therapist, you're in the caretaker role, and being an artist, I had a storyline was that I was being narcissistic and not taking care of people. So I had to integrate that belief system and look at what was being produced and the reaction that people were having, and let that land and really believe that it was impacting people. Mm-hmm. Instead of trying to do this over here, instead of doing the larger thing I wanted to do, because actually I think here's the thing. I think that if people follow the thing that they're 100% passionate about, that has the bigger impact in the world. Like, I think each person has an individual gift that they're supposed to be giving to the world. And that could be painting rocks, it could be producing movies, it could be being a therapist or a coach. It doesn't matter what that looks like. If that's the thing you really love and you commit to it and go for it 1,000%, not a little bit, and then keep 20% over here and 50, that it really can launch. And it might not look the way, I think that things start to come together. Like, there's a synchronicity and there's a flow in the universe that ends up connecting the pieces for you if you let those pieces connect. And I was kind of pushing them back and fighting it and going, oh no, I got this thing over here, I can't do this thing over here. Instead of just going, oh, there's all these openings mm-hmm. I might be scared to take, and I can't foresee the outcome of what that's going to look like. But there's actually, I just keep following that path, even when there's uncertainty and fear, because that still comes up. Even though I love it and I adore it, each time before a show I get scared and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, there's always an internal questioning that it's almost like you just have to go, okay, I hear you, I got that, and then still keep moving forward instead of letting that part kind of run the show.
It's a lot of people talk about that, like, if you feel the fear, like
mm-hmm.
there's going to be fear. And if it's something really good, there's definitely going to be fear. So it almost feels like some of these conversations, and I have to remember it too, because there have been times when I've been like, oh, to do this, like to launch the podcast, I don't know if it's just like, oh, I'm feeling fear. Remember I was talking to, Ellie, and she said, if there's fear, big stuff, like, step into it.
Yeah.
So it's maybe we're just going to change the conversation about what fear means. Like maybe fear is a good indicator, not something we need to run away from.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the, yeah, I mean, I think that's 100% true because I think that when you do the thing you love the most, it's like the thing you're protective over the most and most afraid to do. But it can also provide the most happiness. So it's kind of like you're going to hold both pieces, and how can you hold the tension of both of those and still be able to experience the joy of that? It's almost like you have to walk through the fear of it to get to that joy.
Right, right, right. And maybe the joy is so big because you had to walk through some of that fear, right?
Yeah, and it's scary, and it's like, I've always loved the quote, like, leap and the net will appear, like, and having faith in that. And, I think growing up with trauma and, you know, growing up in a world where I needed to feel like I needed to be in control to create things. And I think art has such a beautiful way of having such an organic way of producing something. And there's such a beauty in that. Like, I've learned faith and surrender from performance more than I've learned from anything else, because there's a beauty when you step on a stage. You really do have to land and embody those characters. And there's a freedom in that and such a liberation.
Cool. What would you say to someone who was feeling like, maybe they have a secret dream or maybe they don't? Maybe they're really questioning like, I don't know what my calling is. And they're in recovery, right? So they've got this life back.
Yeah.
And now they're like, now what?
I mean, I think it's just exploring those little things that you love. I mean, and I think it's exploration, and I think it's being honest with yourself about what you really want. I think we can talk ourselves into, and I think it is not a trap, but an easy thing to fall into when people get sober. They're like, oh, I'm going to go into the drug and alcohol, like I'm going to treat addiction now because now I get it. And it doesn't always have to look the same way everybody else is treating addiction. Everybody doesn't become a KDAC or a therapist or I mean, it could look that way and that could be perfect. But I think most people have addiction. I think of addiction as like a creative kind of misdirection. I think of addiction as like a possession that's misdirected. So there's some piece that needs to create something, and that we're all creative beings, and that can creativity has a much broader definition than a painter. I think for many years I didn't think that I was creative because I'm not a painter. Like I made up I needed to be a painter or draw to be an artist. And if I didn't fit into that category, then I wasn't an artist. I had such a narrow view of what art was for myself. Right. Other people I thought could just go do whatever they wanted.
Yeah, I always thought oh, I'm not creative. I always thought, oh, I'm the business major. I'm not the creative one. Yeah. But then I found out I was.
Yeah, you really are. I got a lot out of. I used to lead people through the artist way, and I think that, I think the morning pages of doing those 3, longhand pages of handwritten pages really can start a dialogue with what is your inner calling. Like it's talking to you. There's like little whispers that you get, and it's like the more you listen to that voice becomes clearer.
Would you have questions that if somebody were like, okay, and don't know the whole artist way, and they maybe don't want to get
yeah,
but just like, okay, so I'm going to do a week of morning pages. What are some questions I should ask?
Yeah, it's not really question. I mean, I think it's just see what comes out. I mean, the idea is that you're doing a stream of consciousness. So it might initially be the grocery list and your to-do list and fears, but eventually there's going to be other things that filter to the surface. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just following those inner nudges, like, oh, I want to go to that art opening, or this book looks interesting, or I should talk to that person. And then letting those things that are like synchronicity link up and lead the way.
I like it. That's good. Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I see like my logical brain being like, what are the questions we should be asking? It's like, just let stuff come up.
That's what was interesting. For many, many years, I was a writer. I journaled, and I had a dresser full of journals, and I read memoir. I loved people's memoirs, and I loved writers, but I never once considered being a writer because I was like, oh, I journal. That's what I do. That's not a writer. And when I, took this writing class that had a performance piece, and there was a performance program, everything in my being was like, you have to go do that. My brain was like, it made no sense. I had never performed. No one in my life thought it was a good idea. Everyone's like, what are you doing? And I knew every part of my being was like, you have to go do that. And I remember I went away for a weekend. I lived in Portland at the time, and a friend of mine had a beach house, and I went away to do, to figure out well, actually, no, that isn't what happened. That was for the graduate program. But both times, both before my graduate program and this performance program, I went away both times and really contemplated like what I was doing and what the nudge was for it. And the thought of not doing it, it was like I knew I had to do it, even though there were all these obstacles that didn't make sense. Like I was joining a performance program with people that had performed since they were kids. And basically I was doing like an MFA program for my BA. So I thought, well, how does that make sense? Like, I'm not qualified to do this. And everything in me knew that I was supposed to do it, even though it didn't make sense and I was terrified.
That's so great. I love that. Well, and I'm so glad you mentioned that because I didn't even think to ask, like, oh, had you performed all your life? Like, that's a big NO, right?
Yeah.
That's
a big.
It's a big N. No, you
No.
hadn't, which
Yep.
is pretty
Yep.
extraordinary, right? Because a lot of times you hear people are like, oh, I was performing since I was, and it's always what I wanted to do. And no.
Well, as a kid, my brother was an actor and I loved that he acted, and I would make up these skits with my friend. And because I was overexposed to trauma, I would make up these like horrific soap opera stories of like so and so was murdered and then they had an affair and then they died, and I loved it, but I never thought of that as like, oh, I'm creating stories. Like I know what, I wasn't in an environment because everything was so chaotic where someone was really fostering that. So it's like, I mean, I think that people will say that it's too late to do whatever they want to do. Oh, I need to have done that forever, or I should have had training, or I'm too old to start doing this. And I think I was 28 when I started that performance program. So, I mean, I think that, yeah, and I just committed to it.
And isn't it funny that like hearing 28, like, so I'm 47 now. So I hear
Yeah.
28 and I'm like, oh, that's so young. But
Yeah.
when I was 28, I thought, well, if I haven't mastered it already, forget it.
Yeah, it seemed old to be doing it. Like, in my head, I felt like I'd had a web and graphic design business, and it didn't fit in anything I'd ever talked about doing. So it's like, well, where did that come from? But everything in me, I had spent many years being like a shadow artist. Like I was dating or friends with other people that were artists and helping support them produce their work. And I didn't get that actually what I wanted was to do that thing myself.
Wow.
You know,
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just wondering, so to relate it to your recovery, like it seems like this really cracked open after getting into recovery, right?
It did. I was sober. I got sober in the middle of that performance program, and I, did the first show sober, and the work was better when I was sober. Like it was, and I think a lot of people have some theory that creativity happens through consumption, and once they're sober, people are afraid they've lost that voice and they don't know how to find that. And I think that you're actually more connected sober than through any other substance. I mean, I think I think I sought creativity and connection and spirituality through using substances and didn't find it, but that was what the seeking was.
Do you think it was like a seeking your calling, connection, or what do you think that was?
Yeah, I think it was just so misdirected. Like, I think that I think for long-term sobriety, there has to be some sort of, it doesn't have to be, but I think to really, yeah, that's a pretty bold statement, but I think if people can find that thing they're passionate about and follow it, it might evolve and ebb and flow and look like a lot of different things, but then they're really in the flow of who they're supposed to be, rather than I'm going to go do this and da 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 da. It might, it's like, it's funny. I had a similar thing happen in once I was licensed and doing the show, I was like, oh, I can't give up my clinical piece because I spent $100,000 on grad school and, my education. And if I let that go and just perform, then I'm throwing that away. But they actually linked up. And a lot of that was in my head that they didn't actually serve one another,
Yeah, you were telling me about the connection you made, that you were always the caretaker. And can you talk about that a little bit?
So, I mean, I think I grew up, playing my mom's, husband, caretaker, therapist. And so I knew how to do that without even thinking. That's like a natural thing. And so when I became a therapist, I mean, I think that there was a lot of, you know, I know how to do that with my eyes closed, and yet I have this other thing I really want to do. And that thing actually serves people in a much bigger way than this thing I know how to do. I'll do whether I'm a therapist or not. Like that's just part of who I am as a person. So I think really being able to take on that it's okay for me to do that and give back in that way, and I can actually give back in a much bigger way and have a much larger impact rather than pulling back and being the caretaker and taking on other people as projects.
Cool. That's great. Well, and I love how you've said it a couple different ways, but how, and even when I've said, if you're scared of something, if you're frightened, if there's fear, do it. But what I've really heard from you is that, yes, like there's a challenge and there's like, there can be fear, but that you took everything, there were steps and you just like did the next step and then did the next step. You didn't know it was going to look like this. You didn't know you were going to be doing retreats in Hawaii and having, the show that people are talking about all over town. It just was the next thing and then the next thing. And I think that's so important because I think especially as people in recovery, 0 to 60, or if, I'm supposed to be over there, if I see it over there, but I don't know how I'm going to get there, I can't do it and I can't start. When in fact, see it and then just start, right?
Yeah, I think you just commit. Like I wanted to put the show up and I was doing bits and pieces and I saw the Hollywood Fringe Festival and I thought I'm going to put the show in the Fringe Festival and see what happens. And then I was like, oh, I don't want to stop doing this. So I'm going to create a production company and rent a theater. And then I've just added, the thing has just naturally grown to a much larger thing. And it didn't make sense. I was like, people are like, oh, you're going to saturate the market and you can't keep doing the show. And there was a lot of like, well, why are you going to keep running the same show? A lot of like, not resistance, but people questioning how that was going to work. And I just followed that inner knowing that this was the thing I was supposed to keep doing, even if I didn't know what it was going to look like.
That's so important for people to hear because I think that can be, because there's part of me that wants to say, well, how did you know? And sometimes we don't know, but if we hear that other people did it and we have the moment where we're like, I don't know. And then they remember, wait, I remember listening to that woman, Tonya, talk and she just did it. So it's almost like you give permission for people to just do it.
And I think, when I get scared, I'll watch like the Actors Studio. And I'll listen to actors who are successful talking about their story. There's always a tidbit in there. I'm like, oh, they were scared. They were getting ready to do a Hugh Jackman was talking about, he was doing, I don't remember what Broadway production, and he was telling his wife it was too much. He couldn't do it. He wasn't qualified. Like it wasn't going to work. And, just that fact that the fact that we all have fear and self-doubt and that you bulldoze through that. And kind of surrender, like each time I do a show, like I don't have control over the outcome of that show. Like I can show up, produce it, sell tickets, get people there. I do an art reception to support other artists as an opening part of the show. But I don't really know what that's going to look like, and there is a beauty in that. And it's terrifying, but there's something... I think to be honest, the more I did the show, I was like, I love this so much that I have to, for my soul's calling, to continue doing this, and if that works, great, and there's a way that it's going to work because that's the thing I'm supposed to be doing, and just trusting that,
And the next right step,
and then taking lots of action. I'm very like action goal driven anyway, so I think for me it's like I commit to it by booking a theater or committing financially to something and having a lockdown date.
Killer, that's smart. Okay, so we're kind of towards the end, and I'd love to ask you I'd love to ask you. So here's the question.
Okay.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want people to know, or just that you're thinking of that you want to add to the conversation?
Trying to think. I think that it's like the piece, I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about the piece that I do with other people in the workshop I have called Telling the Truth on Stage. And it's been a really beautiful process to figure out. I feel like that really has been integration of doing the show and then doing these retreats and workshops has been a way for me to still feel like I'm working with people and moving things in people's psyches, and creating art at the same time. And I think it's just, I'm so excited that that piece came together in that sense. And that was like an evolution too. Like I was doing these workshops called the Razabach technique. And I was like, no, this isn't exactly right. And I just kept playing with it, and it evolved into the thing that it's supposed to be.
That's really cool. Tonya, you are amazing. I really am honored to call you a friend. And I am so honestly inspired by the way you just keep stepping into like the next bigger thing, the scary thing. As I said, there's a generosity of the permission that you're giving and the courage you're showing. And it just is like, ooh, if she's doing that, what could I do? So it's beautiful you sharing that with the world. Thank you for sharing what you do with the world, and thank you for sharing it with me in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I'm honored to know you. You also have a super bright light and show up and have a huge impact on people. And it's been nice to see your piece evolve into a much bigger thing. Cool. It's beautiful,
Oh, thanks, honey.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were going to say that. That's nice. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
Like,
okay, cool. Well, until I see you on the stage again, we'll say goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.